it's like a very, very small proportion of people are responsible for the vast majority of the abuse, racism, expressions, hate online. I think I saw something like it was like 1% of internet users are responsible for, it was either 80 or 90%. Is that consistent with your experience and what you've seen?
The challenge, though, Andrew, is toxicity is viral. And what I mean by that is if I'm an asshole to you, the likelihood that you go and have a toxic interaction in the next session where you're on that platform goes up by 300%. So while it does stem from it's not really a small pool of users at this point, but like even 1% of internet users, what happens is it's then viral and amplifies and spreads really rapidly through those communities.
Hello everyone, this is Zach Grauman. I was Andrew Yang's campaign manager and now the co-host of Yang Speaks with Andrew. On today's episode, we talk about the Facebook boycott and what's going on there. And we also bring on this guy who's fascinating. His name is Jon Redgrave, and he's an entrepreneur who's built this AI technology that identifies hate speech online. It's a fascinating conversation and extremely relevant right now. So tune in. Hope you guys enjoy.
Well, this week on Yang Speaks, we're going to talk about the Facebook boycott. What is going on?
Yeah.
You might have seen a headline about this thing and thought, wow, what did Facebook do? what did Facebook do?
What did they do?
And what do we want from them? So I got to say, this Facebook boycott has now gathered up some of the biggest brands in America, in the world, really. Coca-Cola, Unilever, Starbucks, and Patagonia, North Face. Like there are a lot of huge brands that have said they are not going to advertise on Facebook for the month of July. And this is big news. And I have to say, I fully support this effort. I think it's pretty phenomenal. And the genesis of this was not the advertisers themselves. It's not like Coke woke up one day and was like, you know what, like let's give Facebook a hard time. So as usual, there were some other people that were working behind the scenes trying to make this happen. And in this case, it was the NAACP, the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, which is anti-hate generally. We tend to think of them as being anti-Semitism, I suppose, if that's like can you say anti-Semitism without making sense? And Color of Change. The campaign's called Stop Hate for Profit. And what they're asking Facebook to do is to change their ways in terms of how they police and monitor and enforce bans against hate speech on their platform.
It's I was looking in this Andrew, and it really is. I was thinking, what is the impact of people not advertising on Facebook? And the reality is, Facebook is advertising today. You know, they make $70 billion a year in ad revenue, but there's no way to sell a product right now on any sort of scale or hyper focus without using Facebook. And it's one of the reasons why I think a lot of people have problems with them, because they don't need to listen to anyone. They are advertising. They are marketing. And even these companies, these massive brands are only a small percentage of their entire business, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, the numbers are really interesting, where if you look at the top 100 brands, they accounted for $4.2 billion in Facebook advertising last year, which sounds like a truck ton. But you're talking about a company that makes $70 billion a year, so 4.2 is, maybe 5 or 6% of the total. Right. And it's not like all 100 brands are turning it off for a year. You have maximally, right. These brands are turning it off for a month. So this is a significant dent, but it's not threatening like the core business of Facebook to the point where they're going to be having cash shortfalls. in part because of the universe of advertisers, like you just said, Zach. Because I remember when I ran a company, if you wanted to reach consumers, you had to advertise on Facebook. There were like the granddaddies of ways to reach people. It was Facebook and its Instagram affiliate. And then you had Google. And that's where a lot of your money was going. And we were not a major brand. We were a relatively small company. So the reason why so much of their revenue is not dependent upon the major brands is you have every small to medium-sized business in the country that has any degree of internet savviness putting ads on Facebook.
Right. And so the issues, there's so many companies that literally can't afford to not advertise on Facebook because they're generating the vast majority, if not all of their business from Facebook. So I do applaud. It is a big deal that the companies that can afford to not advertise on Facebook are doing so. I think that's important. So it's more of, it's not just symbolic. It's, you've got the best American brands we have saying like, Facebook, this is wrong. And that is a big deal. They can have a lot more power. Even though they're a small percent of revenue, they've got a lot more power collectively, I think, than these mom and pop shops trying to throw their weight around.
This is absolutely terrible for Facebook's brand. Imagine being a company and having every major brand being like, no to advertising. I mean, if this happened to a TV show or personality, like this person would have to be, probably thrown off the air if every brand was like, no, thank you. So I don't want to understate the power of this boycott.
Right.
I think it's one of the most significant efforts I've seen in modern life that I can recall. And so the first question I think people might be asking is like, what did Facebook do? What did they do to deserve this?
What's the issue?
What's the issue? And a lot of it isn't so much what they did, it's what they didn't do. It's like they're just looking up and being like, well, first what they didn't do is they didn't actually take a hardline stance against a lot of content on the network or sources of misinformation or in some cases, really rancid, horrendous messages. And so if you're a high-level advertiser, you're like a Coke or a Starbucks, you don't want your high-level product and brand associated with something sketchy. So that's like a concern that some of these advertisers are leveling. But Facebook has, number one, taken a very, very hands-off approach to just about anything on their site. And so that's a very legitimate concern that both civil rights activist groups and advertisers would have. And then number two, what they have not done is they have not been transparent at all about their own operations or standards. Whenever someone comes and criticizes them about what they're doing or not doing, they just say, essentially, trust us, we're working on it. And there was a period when that actually worked pretty well for them because the Facebook brand was pretty positive, big text brand was pretty positive. People just associated them with innovation and ease and modernity. And there was this instinct, well, that Facebook knows better than the government. Facebook knows better than regulators. Right. Facebook. So when they said trust us, it actually like worked for a while. But now people are like, wait a minute. Do we trust you? Like, what's really going on over there?
What have you done to earn that trust? Yeah, it's
like, well, let's see. Did Russians interfere with our election last time with your, at a minimum, like not safeguarding against it? Was there a Cambridge Analytica hack of millions of users that there might have been others that we just don't know about? Like that one was publicized. Are you making tens of billions of dollars off of our data and we're not seeing a dime? Like these things are all true. And so now everyone's looking at Facebook and saying, actually, we don't trust you. And this is the situation Facebook is in. It's unprecedented in their history. Now, they have had a very poor track record of genuinely opening up their practices and coming clean and being subject to outside scrutiny. They're frankly just terrible at it. This is, and someone talked about how Facebook is less a company than a country or a civilization. I think I was talking to someone.
They're bigger than most countries, aren't they?
Oh, they have 2.2 billion users. So that's, way bigger than any country. You know what I mean? So they're joking like it's Emperor Zuck and his 2.2 billion subjects, and so
Right.
so they are really legitimately terrible at saying like, yes, here's what we did wrong, and you can check it out, and we need help with this. Like, they genuinely think that they are bigger and smarter and better than anyone else in the world, and if you criticize them, their instinct is just to deflect and like put out cryptic communications being like, we're working on it, we're looking at it. So there's a legitimate cultural problem that we can all see, that they don't feel themselves truly to be subject to much of anything from the outside world.
And Facebook has been saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but Facebook's generally been arguing, we are a marketplace for ideas. We're a platform for ideas. And that our users generate things, and we just exist. We have no, say, input into what goes on there. And so therefore, when there's terrible things on there, or super positive things, we're just hands off. And now we're at the point where we're like, that's not cool. That's now become problematic. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that is right. They say we're not a publisher, we're a platform. As a platform, we don't have responsibility or accountability for anything that people say on our platform. The way that, for example, a magazine or a TV network would have like standards.
Right.
And then they approach banning or restricting communication on their quote unquote platform as like, oh, that would be censorship. We're just like open forum and then let everyone do what they want. Now, that to me is a very convenient stance for them to take. But it also is, but it's not matching up to reality, because we have to acknowledge that Facebook at this point is the biggest publisher in the history of the world. Like, saying that we're not a publisher, like, your entire thing is content and advertising. Like, you're making $70 billion on ads. Like, what that really seems like to me is like a publishing empire or media empire, because you know how a lot of these media companies make money also on advertising. So if we hold them to certain standards, it seems strange for Facebook, which is bigger and richer than all of the other media companies combined, to somehow say like, no, we have less responsibility than all of these other companies. And this is a way for them to really maximize their revenue and profitability. It'd be one thing if Facebook were making decisions where it was like, oh, this is actually like against our interests. There was a Facebook investor who characterized it as like, Facebook just hates friction. It just wants to grow, and it sees everything that you are throwing in its way as friction. This boycott, like, how do we get rid of this friction? like that's like their. So restrictions on content, like, that would be friction. Like, they're just trying to be as frictionless as possible, and that worked during a growth phase of a scrappy startup, kind of. But at this point, you're the potentially the biggest, most influential company in the world. You need to have some kind of different approach and evolution and responsibility.
Right.
So what are the advertisers and civil rights organizations asking Facebook to do? So I found this to be fascinating, because I was like, ooh, what are like the demands? Like, how do we know if this boycott works?
Yeah, we actually pulled this up.
Yeah, it's like, what are they trying to accomplish here? And so there's a whole list of demands that there are about 10 of them. I will go through some of the bigger ones, because some of them are related to each other. So this one I thought was very, very important. Submit to regular third-party independent audits of identity-based hate and misinformation, with summary results published on a publicly accessible website. Because Facebook, again, is a black box, and they're just like, hey, we got it. Like, our stuff says it's good. So that the boycott is calling for someone else to actually post the data in a way that's not completely subject to Facebook's own internal reporting. I think that is perfectly reasonable. I think providing providing an audit of and refund to advertisers whose ads were shown next to content that was later removed for violations of terms of service. Heck, if you removed content and I was an advertiser and I was next to that, I would not want to have paid for that ad. So
seriously, there's some really bad fails on there where it's like, charity, most wholesome charities in the world advertising next to discriminatory hate groups, Facebook, whatever. Anyway, that's an easy one and fair in any other business, by the way.
The next demand: remove public and private groups focused on anti-Semitism, violent conspiracies, Holocaust denialism, climate denialism, white supremacy.
Yeah.
There's another piece around this that's ensure accuracy in political and voting matters by eliminating the political exemption, which is something around their disavowal of being able to verify whether or not a political ad is true or false. This to me is both common sense and irresponsible because cable networks say that they have to verify whether a political ad was true or false before they broadcast it. But Facebook's like, who's to know? We should let the voters decide.
Right.
It's like a voter has the time to figure out whether some Facebook ad served up to them was bullshit or not. So Facebook is clearly grappling with what to do about political ads. They recently made an announcement saying we could all turn off political ads if we wanted to on our Facebook page. Now, I'm sure that setting will be buried somewhere. Like I would be thrilled if it was a giant button saying like, you want to turn off political ads? Because I think a lot of people would click that button. And to me, having political ads on Facebook, if you're going to have them, you need to verify that they're not nonsense and misinformation and the rest of it, particularly given that we know there are foreign actors that have been interfering in our elections. So you need to actually take some responsibility. Having voters have the ability to turn it off, highly interesting. I like it. It's individual autonomy. And if I don't want to see political ads, I get to turn it off. Saying to Facebook, hey, no political ads at all on the platform, highly interesting. I wouldn't mind that either. You could make Facebook a politics-free zone. And clearly you're edging in that direction a tiny bit if you're letting people turn it off themselves.
Okay, this episode of Yank Speaks is brought to you by Outer Known, and I can comfortably say this is one of the most comfortable clothing brands I've ever owned. And I think you agree, Andrew.
Yeah, that they feel great, they look great. That they were not made by like miserable Bangladeshi kids who are getting their knuckles broken or whatever. Like they're made in the right way in a sustainable fashion. So you feel good about them. I love my Outer Known clothes. I gotta say, like they sent some over, and I was like, ooh. And then I bought some with this discount code I'm about to give you all. I've been enjoying it. It's made by Kelly Slater. You know what it is? Kelly Slater was like an 11-time world champion surfer. Like I feel cooler in these clothes because I feel like a little bit more of a surfer, which would make me a total poser because I can't surf worth a damn. But it makes you feel a little bit more like a professional surfer.
You could. More like you could surf.
Yeah, and that no one would just like yell you off the beach or something. So go to outerknown.com today and enter my code YANG at checkout. Get 25% off your full price order. That's outerknown.com, outerknown.com, and use my code YANG at checkout for 25% off. Check them out today, outerknown.com. Don't forget promo code YANG. And enjoy your new clothes.
Worth it. Let me ask you this. This is the conservative in me asking. When people hear, if the general Republican angle on this is when you hear we're going to ban the hate speech, we're going to ban false information, things like that. How does the organization, how does Facebook, how does this regulatory organization define hate and define what's right or wrong here? Because to me, there's some obvious ones, right, where there's clearly backed science, people denying the Holocaust existed, things like that seems obvious. But the fear that I think a lot of conservatives have is that this starts to go to a place where if I just don't agree with your position, I can filter it, I can mark it as spam, I can kick it off the platform. What are your thoughts on, and this is kind of what you talk about with Jon too on this podcast, is what are your thoughts on how you quote unquote regulate the hate?
Yeah, so their request here with this boycott is to create expert teams to review submissions of hate and harassment. So this is something that you need some kind of tribunal or a committee on, and then they make a decision, and then we can see what kind of decision they make. And I don't disagree that this seems sticky, where you're just like, oh no, like who the heck is going to decide what's off limits and what's appropriate? Because principled disagreement, totally appropriate. Like people saying like, hey, like I actually have this very, very different point of view on it. Fine. But then when you start having, you know, like revisionist history, like about the Holocaust or something else that's like an historical event, that ends up feeding into very dark ideologies. And so you can't say, well, we don't have the ability to draw any lines, because then you wind up with some really evil, awful stuff. And Facebook hasn't even taken that stance.
I agree. I think the way you would do this, Andrew, is you'd have to have as unbiased as you possibly could, board of reasonable people from both sides of the aisle, right? Or various different ideologies and backgrounds and ethnicities and experiences. So you could come to terms with either reasonable rules or reasonable arbitration or however that works. And I realize that's hard. To me, what bothers me is, yes, this is hard and challenging, maybe costs a little money, but Facebook, you're making $70 billion a year. You have infinity money. Like the excuse that we need to grow and that profitability at all costs doesn't make any sense.
It stopped making sense a long time ago. It's true. They almost have a money machine over there. They just sit there and like just print hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah, like this isn't fair anymore to like be like profitability overall. Like, come on, you're yeah. So
so someone compares this to negative externalities, where if you had a chemical company or a manufacturing company in the 20th century, and there was a period where they would just dump shit in the river because they'd be like, whatever. And then eventually we looked up and we're like, hey, you really should not be dumping your waste products in the river. We need rules around that. There's something similar going on with Facebook, where they're almost like these psychic waste products that are getting produced. You know, it's like they're like printing bajillions of dollars, but it's like, hey, you know what's suffering? Our democracy, our mental health, our ability to distinguish fact from fiction, our ability to communicate with each other, our ability to trust anything. These are the negative externalities of some of Facebook's practices, and Facebook is attributing essentially zero or near zero consequence to these things. They're looking at them being like, I hear you chirping about these things, and I will try and get you to shut up as expediently as possible, because I really don't genuinely care about anything you're saying. It's like really the message everyone has been getting for a long time. And so now you literally have like the biggest brands in the world lining up being like, Facebook, please, like, take this seriously. Start like listening to some of these people that want you to get your acts together and grow up as a company. And one of the most encouraging things about this is that there are people in Facebook that are saying the same thing. That like the people at Facebook are like, I work here and I'm feeling less and less good about it because everyone's starting to hate us, and they can tell that we're not actually trying to solve any of these problems in a serious way. Now, what I know about the Facebook organization from when I, like outside looking in, so who the heck knows? But it's a very, very top-heavy organization in the sense that a lot of the power resides with Mark and Cheryl. And if you look at even like the capitalization structure, like the voting rights, it's really Mark. Like Mark's got the ability to override everything under the sun. So when we talk about all of these things, there's almost one human being that matters insofar as practices significantly changing, and his name is Mark Zuckerberg. Like the fact that there are other people on Facebook now that are trying to agitate for this is very, very powerful, because from what I've heard about the workings of Facebook organizationally, is they do not like people being pissed off and unhappy within their ranks. Like they
Right.
consider themselves like a fairly harmonious org, and the last thing you want is friction from within. It's like, but it's not the kind of thing where it's not realistic for them to be like, you're a source of friction, get out, because like they're like apparently dozens or hundreds of employees who are voicing some of the same concerns. So I'm cautiously optimistic that we're reaching a really unprecedented point in Facebook's history where we might see some genuine change and genuine reform. They're going to do something in response to this. Whether it goes as far as the list of requested reforms, I don't know. Certainly their history would make you think that it will not go anywhere near that far. But if anything is going to make it happen, it's this time, this era. And congratulations to the activists and leaders who've made this boycott so powerful. It's awesome. Again, I'm not sure I can remember something like this happening.
I was a public policy major, and there's something called a collective action failure. I don't know if you learned this, but it's like when you have a park, right? And everybody loves a great, open, beautiful park, but there's always a couple assholes that will go in and leave some trash or park their car on it or blast music on it. And if one or two people do that, it's not the end of the world. But when everyone does it, it becomes a mess. Or if no one's cleaning it up, it hurts everybody, and the value of it starts going down. And that, to me, feels like what's sort of happening with Facebook, where like everybody likes the idea of connecting the world and having a platform to share anything and find anyone anywhere. But we've now gotten to a point where there's so much mess and no one's cleaning it up. And the bigger problem, Andrew, is that there's no other park to play in. This is the only one. And so I'll give credit.
Oh, and when another park was forming, this park bought that park.
Just buy it, yeah. Yeah. And they messed that one up too. And so we're all stuck in this like shit-filled park, and we're begging someone to just clean it up. And we don't even want like an epic amount of cleaning. We just want the basics done. Like these demands are so freaking reasonable. That's what like to hit me so hard. I'm like, they're not doing any of this. I hope this, to your point, like besides massive government intervention, this is probably the only other way you could do it.
You really have to reflect on the fact we've gotten to this point, like, so the government's been completely out to lunch. Facebook's just been doing its thing, growing like a giant Jack and the Beanstalk type operation where they're like, overtaking the world. Right. And now we're at a point where literally it's like Coca-Cola and Starbucks and Pepsi and Unilever and Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia like standing up for us. I mean, really, if you really reflect on that for a second, like that's how bad things have
the champion
gone.
of the people. Clorox, the champion of the people. Like that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, and in part because our government is just so behind the curve on these issues. Like there was a period they just worshipped technology, and they don't understand it. It's one of my goals is going to be to try and speed government up on these issues. Certainly the data dividend project that we announced last week is part of this. Like we should own and benefit from our own data. And so if you have not signed up for your data dividend, go to ddpforall.com and get that done. July 1, actually, the CCPA is in effect in terms of enforcement, and we have some exciting announcements on that side. So that's one big part of it. But this maturity that we're asking Facebook to demonstrate in terms of how it deals with its content and political ads and other things is so important. It's so central. And kudos to the people who've led this particular charge. Certainly, I'm very supportive of it. And I hope that the people in Facebook who listen to this, like you are very, very powerful. You're like 10,000 times more powerful than anyone outside of Facebook, because we know that Facebook leadership and Mark Zuckerberg listen to you more than they listen to anyone else. So keep pushing, and let's try and get Facebook to live up to its responsibilities as one of the biggest and most powerful companies in human history.
Jon has literally started AI that I hope Facebook or a lot of these tech companies start using to help meet some of these demands. I get that right?
Yeah, so Jon is the CEO of this brand new tech company, co-founder and CEO of Centropy, which has a product to identify hate speech and on any platform. So you could use it not just on Facebook, but you could use it on your corporate intranet. You could use it on other social media platforms. And it's a really interesting discussion. It's a really interesting problem. I know when you hear this, you might think, oh gosh, this sounds awful. Like, because who the hell wants software looking at the shit that I type? None of us really, no, truly. I mean, I understand. Like, none of us wants that. But if you look system-wide and society-wide, like, do you need some kind of tools and infrastructure? Because after that, it falls literally on the head of some miserable, underpaid human being, generally a contractor, who's supposed to read it and see that it's, acceptable or unacceptable, or most likely in most forums, it just goes completely untouched. And 99.8% of the time, that is completely fine because we're reasonable people and the rest of it. But then some small fraction of the time, it's toxic and it can even become damaging and dangerous and destructive. And the way that these internet networks work is that a little bit of poison goes a long way. It's like like if you've ever looked at, let's say like you get 100 emails a day, and I just had one of them every other day that's like, I'm gonna kill you, like something like really fucking terrible, and you're gonna be like, oh, my emails were 99.5% acceptable. It's like all you're gonna focus on is the one person that's sending some kind of like crazy message, so that's the problem that we're facing on a lot of these platforms. Is a little bit of crazy, unfortunately, goes a long way, and so how do you identify the folks who are not there for any reasonable purpose except to spread hate or harass people or harm people in some way? So that's the problem that Jon Redgrave is trying to solve. He's a really, really savvy, experienced guy who's the CEO of another company that was bought by Apple in artificial intelligence. Learned a lot from him about how his company is trying to solve this problem. Very happy to welcome to Yang Speaks the co-founder and CEO of Centropy, serial entrepreneur, investor, AI guru, Jon Redgrave. He sounds like a fictional British lord. Welcome to Yang Speaks, Jon.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be part of the Yang Gang. I'm really humbled by the opportunity to chat with you this afternoon.
I am so excited to sit down with you because you're working on something that might help us get out of this mess that we're in, and you've been working on it for years. So if you could share a bit about your background and how you came to be working on AI detection of hate speech, which is what we're going to get into.
I was fortunate enough to be introduced to two computer science professors, both geniuses in their own right. Chris Ray and Mike Kaffir are their names. Chris, he won a MacArthur Genius Award. And so it literally joining these geniuses, we were doing the most cutting edge AI work where we were essentially teaching machines how to read with human levels of context.
Wow.
The most important work we did at the company was with DARPA. And we were working with DARPA through the MEMEX program. And in that, we were fighting human trafficking. And so in the human trafficking domain, and this leads into my Centropy story, so I'll get there, but in the human trafficking domain, what's really problematic is when a human trafficking ring is broken up, all of the language and the patterns of behavior changes, right? So you have this adaptive adversary problem. And because you have that problem, you need really advanced technology that can understand linguistic evolution. Right? So I'm making it sound maybe more complicated than, well, it is fairly complicated from a computational perspective, but at the end of the day, we are figuring out how language changed.
So they communicate in code, and DARPA is trying to figure out what the heck they're talking about and how to detect what they're saying. And they switch the codes all the time because they don't want to get caught. Is that the challenge?
You nailed it. So this is a problem. One, the human trafficking problem has been one that's, frankly existed for, nearly our entirety as human beings. But, the people who are perpetrating human trafficking have gotten much smarter. And so when a human trafficking ring would get broken up, all of a sudden the patterns would change. So phone numbers that are properly formatted with parentheses, 3 numbers, dash, 4 numbers would change into leet speak, which is the combination of changing numbers into alphanumeric symbols, right, or patterns. So like the classic one that most people know is changing the number 3 into an E, for instance, right? So you'd start to see this leet speak be introduced, new combinations, people would write out the numbers. But the most interesting pattern that we saw was when dollar denominations started to shift into flower varietals. So literally, instead of saying this will cost you $1,000, they would say this is going to cost you 1,000, carnations. Yeah, exactly. Tulips, carnations, right? And being able to pick that up as a human being, who studies it, is actually not that hard. But to train a machine to do it is really hard.
So then you got absorbed into Apple, and then now you're back at it, where you have co-founded a new company that is taking some of the expertise that Lattice developed and taking on a whole new problem that right now is very, very central to our current struggles.
Yeah, I mean, look, the psychological and mental health ramifications, right? Like when you think about, I did a little digging, and thought about your mental health and wellness part of your scorecard. It's like, this is a fundamental aspect of that, right? So, I'll give you a couple data points, right? So 30% of adults in the US have experienced severe online harassment. When you apply that to kids, it's 60%. Right. And so the challenge is that the story about your friends is not unique. Like that's our state of affairs at this point.
That's the new normal. Yeah. The indicators are terrible. I mean, we have a mental health crisis right now in this country, and that was pre-pandemic. And the pandemic has, by objective measurements, something like either tripled or 10-tupled like the mental health problems in this country. Then the number of parents who report extreme stress, I think, went something from like 2% to 37%. And as a parent, you and I can understand why they'd be feeling that way. Incidents of self-harm, crisis text line use has doubled to tripled. And it's particularly bad for young people. And to me, like, we're really losing the thread. It's like, if our people are this anxious and depressed and sick, if our kids are struggling to this degree, like, what the hell are we doing? Like, what's the point of anything we're doing if you look up and you see your children suffering?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is about, making both our physical world and our digital world better, because for our kids, the manifestation of their physical self and digital self will be one and the same, I would argue. And I think that requires us to reflect upon not only what's happening in, the physical part of society, but also the digital part of our society. And as I reflect on everything that's happened in the past 3 weeks in particular, I'm very much in support of Black Lives Matter. I stand behind Black Lives Matter. I really hope that this creates change. But when I think about, a role that I potentially can play, the physical world is one that so much focus is being applied to, rightfully so. But the digital world is just, we're losing. We're really losing the battle. We've been
losing that for a long time.
We have.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're both old enough to remember The Well. The Well was, I think, the first online forum. And the founders of The Well, interestingly, came out with a book, and they talked about the struggles with moderation and harassment and abuse in their community, because as soon as they introduced anonymity, all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. Right? You saw kind of the worst behaviors of humanity because everybody was behind the veil of the keyboard and the screen.
It would be particularly bad for kids. I remember when I was a nerdy Asian kid growing up, I'd have a hard day at school. At least I could close the door and be alone. Like today, you close the door and the kids are still right there with you because you pull up the smartphone and see them all, online, and not even them, just like these idealized versions of them or these vicious versions of them.
Yeah, I mean and I've talked to my niece and nephew who are older about this, and they have days where they don't want to pick up their phone because they're worried about what they're going to have to look at. And, I think as I considered this problem space, and I had a couple other things that really impacted me. So, two of my best friends in San Francisco went to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, the school in Florida that suffered a mass casualty event. And then a very close family friend of ours, who I grew up with as well, his wife was shot 15 times in a mass shooting in Cincinnati and survived. And, so these are terrible events, unequivocally terrible events. But when you look at what the perpetrators were doing and how they got into these echo chambers, a lot of it was they were getting red pilled online. Right. And so I felt called, frankly, to come out and try to make a difference when it came to abuse online, because if we don't solve abuse online, then, I think we continue to lose this battle long term around.
Well, the online feeds into the offline, where you look at like the New Zealand shooter, who was very much online in terms of their radicalization and then their attempt to share the act in real time. I mean, it's not just like, people saddened. I mean, it radicalizes people. It makes them capable of inhuman, tragic, catastrophic atrocities. And so I'm really glad that you're standing up to say, look, we can't just turn a blind eye to this anymore. It's like feeding into the destruction of our way of life. But we had Jaron Lanier on Yang Speaks not that long ago. And do you know Jaron?
I don't.
So his ideas to me are in some ways like a necessary foundational layer for what you're talking about. So here's like the I think very commonly held view. It's like, look, people are people are nasty online. That sucks. But, First Amendment, free speech, like, what do you really want to do? Like, who's going to police this? Do you trust the government to police this? Do you trust these firms to police this? So it's just kind of a necessary evil. And so that's like a basic point of view that a lot of people have. And then Jaron Lanier comes along and says, look, there's something about this digital commons that enables negative ideas and ideologies to spread much more virulently and effectively than in an offline world. In an offline world, if you're someone who holds terrible beliefs, it's not that easy to somehow like find other people who are going to like hear you out. It's like, what are you going to do? Like go into the town square and just be like, hey, I hate these people. I hate these people. It's like, it's really like, it's not that easy. But online you can set up like a convening place for your hateful beliefs or ideologies or conspiracy theories. And then people who are adrift and lost can like find their way to it and wind up going down these very deep rabbit holes around other people who will incite them towards hatred. And there was a joke about how on YouTube you're always like 3 clicks away from Alex Jones or whatnot, where like these conspiracy theories are very high engagement. And so you wind up And they get fed to you by some of these algorithms because they're high engagement. And so you could just be there like, watching movie trailers or whatever. And then before you know it, like a little while later, you're like, what's going on? There's like some crazy conspiracy theory. So if you look at the mechanics of these digital networks and the internet, they end up giving rise to much more negative and destructive behaviors and ideologies than was previously possible. And then that's where we are right now. Is like everyone's looking around being like, what the fuck do we do? Because the government seems way asleep at the switch on this stuff. Like it's like they haven't had a serious look at technology in 25 years. Like they're looking around being like, what? Like there was a period where like technology is like, just like they're beyond government like reproach because we're just too dumb and behind. And then you look at the technology firms and you have companies like Facebook that are looking up being like not responsible for anything that goes on. Like we'll have some content moderators who lose their minds just staring at the worst of humanity for weeks on end, and then they sue us because they were contractors, and it turns out we traumatized like hundreds of them, so we'll quietly pay them millions of dollars and then just do it again. So that is like the current world we're in right now. I just want to set that up for you, just in the sense that because I'm sure people have a native resistance to anyone trying to curb any kind of behavior online.
Yeah, I mean, the people who contend that, well, this is how it is and this is how it's going to be. Like, let's take an extreme example. Let's talk about racism. Like, okay, well, if we aren't bucking the status quo on racism, like, are we going to accept that status quo or not? Right. And I think this is a moment where it's not only on us as individuals to take a stand, but also, frankly, the tech companies to take a stand. Like they are, the leaders of the biggest tech companies in the world, their mettle is being tested right now. And it's going to be really interesting to see who's willing to stand up to the abuses that are rampant on their platform and who isn't, right? And what does that mean for not only for, them as human beings, but really what does it mean for them as companies? Right? Because you're right. I mean, the biggest platforms are the places where a lot of this content is concentrated. And it's not, people think, oh, it's 4chan and 8chan and some of these offshoots. It's not. I mean, this is on the main street of the internet at this point. And while it spreads from some of the more toxic corners like 4chan and 8chan, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Discord, others, all have challenges that they need to step up to. And frankly, that's why we built our company, because your point about content moderation is a great one. I mean, one, the content moderation industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry now, propped up by people who are having to, look at the worst of humanity on a daily basis with terrible tools, not very sophisticated technology, and frankly end up in huge numbers with PTSD. Like that doesn't.
Yeah, who
seem
wouldn't
right.
wind up with PTSD if you were just watching child porn and beheading videos all day? I mean, you would lose your mind. It's like they're trying to keep us all from losing our minds, but they're going to lose their minds.
Yeah, and so the big question is, all right, well, what can we do? One, it's can we build better technology, and two, can we get the companies to actually stand up, right? Or force them to stand up. And so, while I think the executive order around Twitter was interesting, like CDA 230 was the crux of that executive order, right? So CDA 230 has been around since the 90s, right? Since Prodigy. And like this is a regulation that deserves additional attention and scrutiny.
Yeah, it deserves some modernization. I mean, what the heck? They passed this law in the 90s when, we were still looking at like, GeoCities or whatnot.
Yeah, we didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Google. Like none of these platforms existed when that regulation was put into place. And while I think the regulation is incredibly important, to be clear, because I think the concept of, well, look, let me boil it down as a restaurant, right? If I own a restaurant, I have the right to let people into my restaurant or not, right? So it's or like a school or a church, right? You have the right from the point of free association, right, to let people in or not. And I think that's an important principle that is applied by CDA 230 to give companies the right to moderate or not to moderate, right, and not be held liable for that. But I think it's really challenging because there's such a large array or diversity of what is required of the companies to get that protection, right? Senator Wyden, who put it into place, he constructed it as both a sword and a shield, right? So the sword is you can moderate what you want. The shield is you are not held liable for what's posted on your site. I think that's incredibly important, but to have that same principle applied to companies who are actually making an earnest effort to moderate versus companies who make zero effort to moderate and let hate spread rampantly. Seems like that.
I love that distinction. Yeah, it's like, look, if you're trying to do the right thing in investing, then we'll not hold you liable. But if you're just like kind of just hand waving at it and saying like, oh, we're protected, like we can't do it, it's too hard. It's like literally you're some of the biggest, richest companies in the world. I mean, I just said countries. I mean, you might as well be a country.
Yeah.
It's like at this point, Facebook reaches 2.2 billion people. I mean, that's bigger than any country, and it's valued at 2/3 of $1 trillion. Like, it's got tens of billions. Like, if anyone can invest the proper resources in it, it's them. But instead of leading in that direction, they're just like, not our responsibility.
If you just improve transparency reporting on what's actually happening, and in general platform transparency, that would go a long way to change the behavior of users, right? Not only users, but also to say to the world, hey, we're actually taking a stand. Here's what we're removing. Here's why we're removing things. And to be more clear and consistent about why things are happening, right? Part of the challenge is it just feels like the Wild West, right? You go onto Twitter, and in the same day that, someone gets blocked for, one form of abuse, you can find that exact same form of abuse in another pocket of Twitter. Yeah.
I mean, these companies are playing whack-a-mole. And on one hand, you're like, okay, I get it. Like, there's a lot of stuff you're after, and I'm not gonna be too mad at you if you if a mole popped up for a little while. But on the other hand, there's this so little rhyme or reason to it where it's hard to have confidence. And it's also clear that this isn't a main priority for certain of them in the way it should be. It should be a much bigger priority than it is.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways this has become existential for Facebook. And to be fair, you won't find me defending Facebook very often, but they have incredibly good machine learning talent, incredibly good. And so their ability to detect different forms of abuse is better than anybody else's, orders of magnitude better, in my opinion. Now, this is the point though. You can detect it, but are you going to take a stand against it? Right? And so you get into these policy arguments where people are saying, well, maybe we should do this, but people aren't taking a data-informed approach. Instead, they're saying, well, here's the thing we're getting beat over the head with in the press, so now we have to write a policy against this. That feels haphazard to me. I've always been a believer that if you can figure out what the data looks like, build your policies such that you can impact the data in the way that you want.
Well, this is really the thing that frustrates me and so many people about Facebook. It's their situation is we're doing our thing. Oh, we've been publicly criticized for this thing that came out in the press, like Cambridge Analytica or some other flare up, and then they're like, oh snap, let's say I'm so sorry, we'll do better, and then come up with some policy, and then someone internally ends up dealing with it. So here are the major problems with this. Number one, it's we're not really sure what's going on with you post your policy implementation because you're not transparent. And two, you have better data than us. So like, why are you waiting for us to like get mad at you about something that happened in some cases like months and months ago? Like, why don't you just like look at what's going on, and then you can tell us. Like that to me is the frustration. And it lets you know too. It's like it really is not the priority it should be, because they only share information or make a policy change after there's some kind of public pressure.
Today's episode of Yang Speaks is brought to you by Athletic Greens, which is the all-in-one daily drink to support better health and peak performance. So even with a balanced diet, guys, it's difficult to cover all your nutritional bases. And so Athletic Greens is this daily drink. It's like nutritional insurance for your body delivered straight to your door. It's this funky green powder that's pretty awesome. You pour it in some water, shake it up, drink it, tastes delicious. And it's got this complex blend of about 75 vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced ingredients, all this goodness to help you get your veggies. It's pretty great.
If you're like me, you do not have enough veggies in your diet, and then Athletic Greens, you like put it in a cup, drink it, and you know you actually did what you needed to do for that day. If you're like an efficiency fiend where you're just like, oh, I got to get stuff done, and this makes you feel like you're getting stuff done because you're being good to your body, it feels good. Like you know it's working. You can tell. It's one of those things you drink it and you're like, yeah, this stuff is working. So whether you're looking to boost your energy levels, support your immune system, or address gut health, now's the perfect time to get Athletic Greens. Visit athleticgreens.com/yang to claim a special offer of 20 free daily travel packs with your first purchase, a $79 added value. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/yang. It's all-in-one nutrition. You drink it, and it'll make you feel better about yourself, your day, and what you're doing long-term for your health.
And the one thing I found out is that if you're doing like the keto thing, the paleo, or you're vegan or dairy-free or gluten-free, it checks all those boxes. It's pretty much everything free. You're good. Athleticgreens.com/yang.
We have a female investor as part of the company, and she was recently harassed on Twitter. And what she had to do was then go and block the users who harassed her, report those users, and then as part of Twitter's process, she had to go through and then look at other content, abusive content from that same user to verify that this person is actually abusive. Like when did we make the people who are the users of our product the first line of defense? Right? Like that just doesn't make any sense. And so, what I'm advocating for is one, more transparency, better communication from these companies about when they're taking action and why they're taking action, which I think, most social psychologists who I've spoken with would argue will have a positive reinforcement loop with the people who actually want to make platforms better, because they see that an action is being taken, or maybe they're in the wrong and they'll change their behavior. And then what I'm really advocating for, naturally, because I'm building a company to do this, is more robust detection. And take the human out of the line of fire as much as you can.
Yeah. So tell us about the technology you're working on. I know one of the facets of it is that you have managed to almost build like a taxonomy of abuse and hate speech, where you can pick up if someone is being racist or abusive, like through AI and their use of particular language. And it's not just the obvious ones. I mean, obviously, like, with someone listening to this is just like, well, like, duh, like if you, call someone certain things, like I could figure that out. But a lot of the times it's much trickier than that. Yeah,
it's a beautiful tee up, frankly, because we've just in the last, couple months seen a bunch of examples of this. But the core of what we're building is a natural language understanding system as a starting point. Because in order to solve this problem, or to be able to at least detect the nuance of this problem, you need to be able to understand the context in which something is being said. So you and I were introduced, Andrew, because my company had identified a huge uptick in anti-Asian racism as a result of coronavirus, right?
Yes.
And so, like in this example, what we were seeing is not only a huge uptick in the normal terminology. And so what most people in kind of the machine learning or data science space would call like a bag of words. So you start out, you have a dictionary of words that are unequivocally bad. That is okay.
I heard a lot of those growing up.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry to hear that you did. It's like that is pretty reprehensible.
I'm just letting people know. It's like we all know what those words. I mean, like the words that come to mind for me are chink and gook. So those like the obvious ones, but then it gets more nuanced.
It gets much more nuanced because what happens is a lot of like the current attack vector for dealing with this problem is, let's just come up with the worst words that people use and the standard spellings of those worst words, and we'll block them, right? But there are a number of problems with that. One, you have an adaptive adversary problem. There are people who are going to shift their language, and we've seen that the language in online communities shifts exponentially faster than it does offline or in the physical world, right? So number two is what happens when people are trying to reappropriate terms. You're going to have a ton of false positives, right? So you're gonna start flagging things totally inappropriately. So like the N word being used in r/rap, or even in a place like hashtag Black Lives Matter, right? Where someone's trying to reappropriate it versus someone who's using it as a white supremacist. Like those have very different connotations, obviously, but if you can't understand the context, that's really impactful. And it means that your human reviewers who are likely seeing this are having to look through a bunch of content that they shouldn't, and they can't prioritize their queue. So going back to the first point though, being able to understand the adaptive adversary. So I'll give you the examples, and you've seen some of these because you saw our report on it, and we have a blog post now about it on our Medium account. But during COVID, we saw this huge spike in terms like Kung Flu, slant eye sickness, Winnie the Flu, which when there's adaptation on Winnie the Pooh, which is used in reference to Tiananmen Square. Like you see we actually caught about 85 new terms that had popped up over a 4.5 week period that are now, a number of which are being used as a replacement for the words that you referenced.
I'm guessing there's probably at least one that references bats. I'm guessing there'd be like.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Like
yeah.
So like bat eater comes to mind for me.
Yep.
I think I know a friend of mine was called that.
Yeah, and this is so it's problematic not only because it's reprehensible behavior, but it's also problematic because norms are formed so rapidly in online communities. So it's not only that language shifts, but the norms form really quickly. And so if you let this content fester, then all of a sudden people go, "Oh, that's normal. This is something that people say," and regardless of whether you're an adult who, frankly should know better in a lot of cases, or you're someone who is down the rabbit hole and looking to reinforce their beliefs, or you're a young, naive kid who just frankly doesn't know better, like it's problematic in all the cases, right?
That's a great point.
Let me give you a slightly more disturbing, although all are disturbing, example from the last 3 weeks. So after Ahmaud Arbery was killed and then George Floyd was killed, we saw an uptick in the use of the term jogger as a replacement for the N-word.
No, it's dark and disgusting, but you can see it.
And so we see this all over. I mean, you could run a search on Twitter and a search on other major platforms, and you will find the use of that term being used as that replacement. Like that's really problematic. And so what we're doing is we're constantly keeping tabs on some of the worst communities online. And then we're using algorithms to tell us what's bad based on how things are contextually similar to other language. And so that is a huge step forward in terms of this problem space, because if you can keep up with the language of the internet, you actually might be able to address this problem proactively. And so, I'll give you one last stat. There are 1,000 terms added to Urban Dictionary a day. That tells you how profound and quickly, language is and how quickly it moves online.
Oh, now one thing that I remember seeing, which I think that most people sense instinctively, it's like a very, very small proportion of people are responsible for the vast majority of the abuse, racism, expressions, hate online. I think I saw something like it was like 1% of internet users are responsible for, it was either 80 or 90%. Is that consistent with your experience and what you've seen?
Yeah, it really depends on the community, to be fair, but on the major platforms, that's definitely true, right? The challenge, though, Andrew, is toxicity is viral. And what I mean by that is if I'm an asshole to you, the likelihood that you go and have a toxic interaction in the next session where you're on that platform goes up by 300%. So while it does stem from it's not really a small pool of users at this point, but like even 1% of internet users, what happens is it's then viral and amplifies and spreads really rapidly through those communities. Every week we read news stories or hear personal anecdotes about people being harassed. I want to help people. Like at the end of the day, I built this company to help resolve systemic abuse, to end online abuse. And at the end of the day, like if I help a bunch of individuals, that's great. Like I'd be very happy. That is great. Right?
I love what you're doing because it's so constructive and positive and concrete and practical. You're in a very rare and privileged position where you may be able to actually make a difference to huge numbers of people by actually helping improve the machinery, which is beyond the capacity of the vast, vast majority of us. And it's great for people to get a sense that people like you exist and that you're doing something that may improve their lives and their children's lives. So if someone wants to find out more about you and your company, it sounds like you have a Medium account. Is it Centropy.com?
Yeah, Centropy.com is our website, and you will be able to get to our Medium account from there.
All right, fantastic. Jon Redgrave, founder and CEO of a company that's going to make the future a little bit brighter and better for all of us. Congratulations, man, and best of luck with the new company. I know it's an incredible journey when you unveil your new enterprise to the public. You've been part of a couple of these ventures before, but you're taking a huge stand. It's so important, and you're fighting for all of us. So thank you.
My pleasure, Andrew, and thanks again for having me on. Happy to be part of the Yang Gang.
Yes, Yang Gang.
Yang Gang.
Welcome, Jon.